In the small, remote town of Millfield, the woods were thick and the air always seemed heavy, like the weight of unseen eyes watching. The locals never ventured near them after dusk, a rule passed down for generations. It wasn't superstition, it was survival. But when Sara, an ambitious journalist from the city, arrived with a notebook and camera in hand, she wasn't interested in legends. She wanted the truth. She checked into the only inn in town, run by an elderly couple who were polite but avoided her gaze, particularly when she mentioned the woods. They warned her that some things were better left unexplored, but she brushed them off. She was determined to find out why everyone was so afraid. The first night, Sara wandered into the forest with nothing but the dim glow of her flashlight and the sound of her boots crunching on the dry leaves. The woods were eerily quiet, almost unnaturally so, and a deep sense of dread began to settle over her. As she ventured further, the air grew colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was as if something was moving around her, breathing with her, but never close enough to touch. Minutes turned to hours. The trees twisted in odd shapes, and every rustle in the distance felt like a warning. Finally, she stumbled upon something unusual, an old, rotting shack hidden deep within the woods. It had been abandoned long ago, the roof caved in, and the walls covered in moss. But there was something about it that made Sara's heart race. She approached cautiously, drawn by a strange, magnetic pull. Inside the shack, the air was thick with the smell of decay. Her flashlight flickered as it illuminated faded, cryptic symbols carved into the walls. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she explored further. And then she saw it, a worn, yellow journal, half buried beneath a pile of dirt. She opened it, its pages brittle and fragile, revealing a chilling account of a man named Elias, who had lived in Millfield long before her arrival. The journal spoke of strange rituals and the worship of something dark that lived within the woods, something ancient and hungry. Elias had written that every 7 years it demanded a sacrifice, and the town would give it one to keep the peace. But one year, something went wrong. The sacrifice wasn't enough, and the thing had begun to grow restless, hunting the town, and those who had lived near the woods were its first targets. As Sara read, a cold hand gripped her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized something. The shack had no windows, no open doors. She had entered alone, but now there was something else in the room with her. A whispering voice began to crawl into her mind, like fingers dragging across her consciousness. It was soft at first, a murmur she could almost ignore, but then it grew louder, more insistent. "Leave," it hissed. "Leave now, before it wakes." Her heart raced as she bolted out of the shack, the whispering growing into maddening shrieks. Branches snapped as she ran, but she didn't dare look behind her. She could hear something moving in the shadows, following her, closing the distance with every step. The trees seemed to close in, their limbs reaching out like skeletal hands, blocking her path. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke through the tree line and stumbled back onto the familiar roads of the town. But the terror didn't end there. Her escape from the woods was only temporary. As she lay in her bed that night, unable to sleep, she heard scratching at her window. She tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, more desperate, until she could no longer deny its presence. The thing from the woods had followed her. It wasn't until days later, when the innkeeper found her lifeless body, pale and cold, staring wide-eyed at the window, that they knew. The town's dark secret had claimed another soul, just like it had so many times before. The woods of Millfield remained as they always had, a place of dread and darkness, waiting for the next curious soul foolish enough to wander in. The town would continue to thrive, but only as long as its people obeyed the one rule they all knew too well: never enter the woods after dusk.